This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, starts the show today by discussing a new final rule on electronic identification for the cattle industry. He says what the mandate is and its issues. K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth continues today's show with information about pillbugs and wheat aphids that growers are seeing and dealing with now. The show comes to an end with K-State's Brad White, Brian Lubbers, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Phillip Lancaster with another segment from the BCI's Cattle Chat podcast discussing calf management practices producers need to be thinking about this time of year. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking about a recent blog article from K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Shelby.
Roger, this recent blog article titled An Electronic Identification Mandate for the Cattle Industry, and something that started way back in 1995.
Yeah, it actually goes back that far. That's when the U.S. entered the WTO, the World Trade Organization, when it was formed back in 1995. And the express purpose at that time, Shelby, of the WTO was to increase imports and exports globally around the world. And when the WTO was formed and the U.S. joined it, there were recommendations made at that time for nations to adopt animal ID procedures to track disease in animals as a means to facilitate trade. So it was seen as a trade promotion type effort. Animal ID would help advance trade across the world. And in the U.S., then, efforts concerning animal ID started in 1999, but really accelerated in 2002.
There was a development from that then in 2010.
Yeah, we fast forward then to 2010, and that's when the USDA announced that it was abandoning a system that it had initially put in place known as the NAIS, or the National Animal Identification System, which at that point in time, that came in basically in 2002. That contained mandatory registration of premises and exclusive use of electronic ID devices, or EID, ear tags on all classes of cattle from birth to slaughter by cattle farmers and ranchers. That proved to be extraordinarily unpopular, and so that was abandoned. Of course, USDA didn't give up on this. They came back in 2010 saying that, well, yes, we're abandoning NAIS and we're proposing in its place a new system known as Animal Disease Traceability, or ADT, and that was designed to be a state-administered program allowing the states as well as tribes to choose their own degree of animal identification and traceability of livestock populations inside their borders. I think the government recognized at that point in time that we can't have a federal program unless we have interstate commerce that's involved. So the states are the ones under the Constitution that regulate the commerce inside their states. So let's have a state-run program, state by state, that doesn't involve interstate commerce. And that was the way they went at this in 2010. But they did say one thing: a state program would be subject to the USDA requirement that all animals moving interstate in interstate commerce have a form of ID that allows traceback to their point of origin. So once it crosses a state line, then the feds can impose their system. But if it's purely intrastate, stays inside the state, then the Commerce Clause is not invoked, and that's a state program.
2010 isn't the only development they've had. Also had a final rule in 2013 before we get to where we are now.
That's right. That new approach that they announced in 2010, it took 3 years to get a final rule published in 2013 that requires adult cattle that are shipped interstate to be affixed with an official animal ID device. And that has to contain official identification number on a metal ear clip, a plastic numeric ear tag, an EID ear tag, or a group lot identification. That final rule wasn't put in place until 2013. And APHIS, which is an arm of the USDA, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, is the administering agency that handles this. They stated in the 2013 rule that this was to be flexible, and they said it was designed to allow producers to use tags that don't require any electronic or special equipment to read the official ear tags. And in addition to that, they were clear that you had a flexible approach, whatever fit your farm or ranch operation the best, you could use. use.
Does that hold true as 11 years later we have another new final rule?
Well, no, it doesn't. And in fact, that promised flexibility back in 2013, while they said that, the USDA made it clear that they were not ending APHIS's EID mandate quest to have an electronic identification mandate. And here we get to 2024, and that's what we see. And between 2013 and 2020, there were lawsuits that were involved. In fact, one important one that bears on the 24 development was in 2019, where the USDA put out a fact sheet, followed by the issuance of a notice specifying that radio frequency ID was going to be the only option going forward. That was challenged successfully in court, and they dropped it. Well, things had been quiet until recently. Beginning of 23, they came up with a proposed rule, which has now been finalized within the past 3 weeks. In fact, it was May 9 that USDA published a new final rule that officially eliminated that flexibility for producers and any lower cost options that a producer might have. Those are now gone, and all the less burdensome requirements that were promised in 2013 are gone. And under that new rule, which becomes effective now since it's been published in the Federal Register on November 5 this year, adult cattle and bison shipped interstate have to bear an EID ear tag, and that effectively eliminates the flexibility given producers under that 2013 final rule.
And what are all those classifications of livestock that really do have to have an identification?
So the new rule specifically says that 11 million cattle will be impacted by the EID mandate. And that's an APHIS estimate based on the number of official identification ear tags that have been used in prior years. And that represents about 11 to 12% of the U.S. cattle and bison inventory that's currently out there. At least that's what I read in the Federal Register when this was posted. That's what they said. So it doesn't change the type or class of animals subject to the EID ear tag mandate from those covered under the 2013 rule. So the classes of cattle subject to the new mandate continue to include all sexually intact cattle and bison, 18 months of age or over, all of your female dairy cattle of any age, and all male dairy cattle born after March 11, 2013. It also includes cattle and bison of any age that are used for rodeos as well as for recreational events, and cattle and bison of any age used for shows or exhibition. Now, cattle and bison can be exempted from official identification requirements under both the 2013 rule and the new rule if they go directly to slaughter. So if there's no interstate connection to this, then they're exempted.
Is there still some shortcomings even with this new final rule?
Well, APHIS does recognize themselves that there are shortcomings with the rule. They acknowledged at least 3 of those that have now been published in the Federal Register, and they acknowledge that 70% of cattle would need to be traceable for it to be fully prepared for incursion of a foreign animal disease. And as I mentioned earlier, the new rule doesn't include any additional cattle. We're about 11 to 12% of the herd, so they're not anywhere close to 70%. That's one shortcoming. They also acknowledge in the 2013 rule that the digitization of interstate certificates of veterinary inspection, or ICVIs, which have to accompany cattle and bison that are shipped interstate, they indicate they need that. That's important to timely traceability. But in the rule, they don't require digitization of those records. They also acknowledge that ear tags on an animal and the accompanying ICVIs and other paper documents work in tandem, and that both are essential to the process of animal disease traceability. But you don't have that under the final rule. Finally, they also acknowledge that while they're requiring producers to buy and put the EID tags on their cattle and bison, it's not requiring anyone in the industry to purchase or even use electronic equipment needed to read and record the EID tags. So they're imposing their mandate on producers. Whether the data in those tags are ever transferred electronically to a digital data management system is purely discretionary. So I don't see how that's going to work.
Roger, are there some people that are wanting to overturn parts of this rule?
Yeah, there's a bipartisan effort in the Congress to eliminate the rule. Senator Mike Rounds out of South Dakota has introduced a bill to bar the Secretary of Ag from implementing the rule. And then you had Congresswoman Hageman from Wyoming that said she was going to try to push this through under a Congressional Review Act to overturn it. And then you have Senators Rounds and Testers out of Montana that are also pushing the Senate to pass a resolution of disapproval. So it's on both sides of the aisle. In cattle country in particular, the representatives and the senators are not happy about this.
What are some of the legal issues around it?
Well, anytime you increase transparency of the flow of livestock and you're increasing the ability to trace it back to your farm, if there's a disease outbreak, the problem is it can be traced back to you. And so that raises concerns of legal liability. And I see perhaps three areas of where the law could nail a producer if the problem is traced back to their farm. And that would be on a strict liability claim, perhaps on a negligence claim, and maybe based on a contract warranty type claim, whether it's non-merchantable or whether it's breached some implied warranty of fitness. So I think those possibilities are out there. There are some state exemptions for contract-based warranties in the livestock producing states, including Kansas, but those are some things we're going to have to keep an eye on.
Roger, what are some final thoughts on this electronic identification mandate in the cattle industry?
Well, I think this is just an incremental step as to what USDA has been wanting for some time, and that's mandatory RFID, basically, radio frequency IDs. And it will have a disparate impact on producers. Again, if you have packing plants in your state, your cattle don't have to cross state lines. If you don't have a packing plant in your state, such as Ohio, you've got to ship those interstate to get to a packing plant. And so the cost is going to be unduly on, say, cattlemen in Ohio than it would be on Kansas. And the question is, well, does that disparate impact raise some constitutional concerns? And it might. And another concern is, where do the chips come from? And a lot of those are produced in China. So that's going to be important to the Congress to look into that, too. Those are just a couple of things that I think are the really big issues that are out there.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will put a link to this blog article in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Wednesday show talking about pillbugs and wheat aphids. And then to talk about it, we're joined by K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. My pleasure.
Jeff, you've been receiving some questions about pillbugs.
Yes. Pillbugs, first of all, are not insects. They can still do a number on young seedling plants and even plants that are growing pretty well. But first of all, it's very important that you realize pillbugs are not insects. They're crustaceans, which means they're more closely related to crayfish, crabs, lobsters, that kind of stuff. And then that's important because that means they have to have moisture, a lot of moisture. So anytime you have a pillbug problem, that means you're getting good rain, you're irrigating well, or your soil is holding the water well, because they have to have free moisture to breathe. They breathe by means of gills, so they have to have lots of moisture. In the case of Kansas, they have been a problem probably since the early 2000s at least, and primarily they started when we started going to no-till or reduced tillage more and more, because that holds the moisture in. That's why we do no-tillage, right, or reduced tillage, to hold the moisture in. It does a good job, but because of that, it allows pillbug populations. Some people call them roly-polies or isopods, but generally the ones we have problems with are pillbugs. And there's some slight technical differences that are not important, but we started to have problems with them basically in south central Kansas because, we get a little more rainfall in the south central part of the state. It holds the moisture in better. And pillbugs, they reproduce very well. There will be anywhere from 1 to 3 generations per year. Each female can produce at least 100 or more eggs during each reproductive period. So therefore, there can be a lot of pillbugs at one time if the conditions are right. And I say if the conditions are right because, like I said, they have to have free moisture. As a kid, anytime after a rain, you go out and lift up boards and stuff, and there's roly-polies. So realize they're indigenous to Kansas. There's a lot of roly-polies or pillbugs all around the state. So when the conditions are right, they start reproducing in vast numbers. By that, I mean we've gone out and looked in no-till fields where they're having problems with pill bugs, and we have found over 600-700 pill bugs per row foot. That's a lot of pill bugs. Normally, they're feeding on decaying vegetation, organic matter in the soil. So if you have a lot of decaying organic matter, that provides a good food source for insects and pill bugs in this case. If you have a lot of moisture, a lot of rain, it's holding in the moisture better, so you got a lot of free moisture in the soil, which allows the pill bugs to breathe and mate and carry on. The eggs will hatch in 2 to 3 weeks during summertime temperatures. So you can see where you can have a lot of pill bugs at any one time.
What crops do pill bugs usually create a problem for?
Generally is with soybeans, just because of the planting time. The pill bugs, after they come out of overwintering, a lot of times they'll mate and they'll have eggs, and the young will hatch, and then we come into mid-May, sometime when it's actually soybean planting time. And it seems that the pill bugs prefer succulent green tissue to decaying organic matter in the soil. So they're there already. We go along and plant soybean seeds right into their living rooms, and then as those soybeans start to germinate, the pill bugs start feeding on them, and they will clip off the plant, and therefore the plant dies.
How might a grower control them?
There's a lot of different ways we have tried to control or manage pill bugs over the years. The seed treatments, if you use, and when I talk about seed treatments, I'm talking about insecticides. Fungicides don't affect pill bugs. So if you treat your soybean seed with an insecticide, it will kill the pill bugs. The problem with that is the pill bug has to take a bite out of that little cotyledon to get the toxin from the seed treatment in order for it to kill the pill bug. It does a really good job. The seed treatments are really effective at killing pill bugs, but unfortunately, the pill bugs are taking a couple of bites out of these little cotyledons. It kills them also. So we've had a real problem where there are pill bug infestations getting a good stand of soybeans, even if the soybean seeds are treated. Now, remember, the insecticide's only going to last 2 to 3 weeks anyway, for the most part. It does a good job. It's just the pill bugs, like I said, if you have 600 or 700 per row foot, that's a lot of little mouths there that once they see that green, or perceive however they do that green seedling coming up, they start chewing on it and it just kills them. So we've had many, many fields over the years where we've had very, very poor stands because of that. So the other thing we've tried is spraying, a foliar spray. Pill bugs are really easy to kill. They're pretty susceptible to just about any insecticide that you want to put on, a foliar insecticide or seed treatment or whatever. They're pretty easily managed by that. The problem is, again, in no-till, they're underneath the surface. They're underneath that organic matter. So when you go over the top to spray them with a sprayer, the organic matter is intercepting the spray. So the spray doesn't get down into the soil where the seed is, where the pill bugs are actually feeding. So it doesn't affect them. If it gets to them, it will kill them, but generally it doesn't get to them just because it's intercepted by the organic matter on top of the soil, and you have that on top of the soil to hold the moisture in. So you can see it's kind of a problem there. The way we've been able to manage it somewhat is to reduce or change your planting date. Either, back it up a couple of weeks or move it ahead a couple of weeks. Now, again, that's according to the weather. If you are able to do that, a lot of guys don't want to do that. They want to get those soybeans planted. I understand that. But one of the, easiest way is to just wait a couple of weeks. Don't add any more water to the field. The pill bugs go down into the soil. They follow the moisture as it goes down, and they're in cracks and crevices and places in the loose soil. As the moisture goes down in the soil profile, that they will follow it down. So eventually they get down below the seed bed. So if you can wait till it dries out a little bit and you can plant, generally you get a good stand just because you've missed the pill bugs. Or if you plant a couple of weeks early before they're active, but again, that's kind of iffy based upon the weather. And remember, they're there in the soil already. But some guys have had luck planting earlier, a couple of weeks early, a couple of weeks late, just to avoid the population feeding on them. Some of the other people that have had problems with them, you can switch crops. You can plant a little bit later if you have corn, or you can plant earlier for corn. You'll miss the pillbugs. Most growers think they only eat soybeans. They don't. From my experience, at least, they eat any green, succulent plant that's out there, which they prefer over the normal old dried organic decaying matter in the soil. So I've had gardeners call up, they've eaten their cucumbers, their squash plants. It's just a matter of timing, and remember, it's a matter of moisture. So also some of the people in some of the growers in south central Kansas have devised some planters that as they plant in the seedbed, it opens up the seedbed, so it removes the organic matter from the soil right over the seedbed, so it leaves it beside it, but it opens up the seedbed, because once that seedbed is opened up, it allows sunlight to get down there, dries it out enough so that the pillbugs can't use it, but there's still enough moisture for the seed to germinate, and that has done really well. Again, basically the pillbugs are a problem at planting time, just while the plants are germinating, but I have seen them, again, early in the season, if it's a rainy year, I have seen them crawl all over the leaves of soybean plants up to about the third trifoliate stage. At that point in time, they're a concern, but they don't do enough damage to cause a problem. And generally, if you're seeing holes in your soybean plants and you can't see an insect, go out at night, because the pillbugs will feed mostly at night when it's, when the humidity's up a little bit. They have to have that free moisture, so keep that in mind if you're trying to manage them, whether it's in your backyard garden or in your soybeans.
Where in the state are they usually found?
They're starting to extend all the way across Kansas. Anywhere where no-till is being utilized, clear up into Nebraska. I've gotten some calls from folks in Nebraska that are starting to have problems with these pillbugs.
And Jeff, wanting to make a quick mention of wheat aphids.
Yes, the wheat's getting far enough along, at least for the most part, that a lot of folks are spraying for a fungal infection in their wheat, and I get a lot of calls about putting an insecticide in to kill the aphids that are out there. There are a few aphids around. Primarily, I've not seen enough yet to cause a problem. One of the worries is the aphids can vector barley yellow dwarf, but at this time of the year, barley yellow dwarf doesn't affect the wheat plant as much as it does in the fall or much earlier in the season. And it really takes like 30 to 50 aphids per head feeding right now in order to reduce the yield. And if there's any lady beetles, they're probably going to help take care of them. So we really do not recommend treating for aphids, and just because it's a little cheaper to put an insecticide in with your fungicide, you'll kill all the lady beetles, you'll kill all the other beneficials, and the aphids that are there right now are really not going to reduce anything, the yield that you're expecting. So I know there's a lot of spraying going on. I know it's a lot cheaper just include an insecticide with your fungicide, but I really think you're doing more harm than you are good right now if you do that.
That was K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
Tuned into Agriculture Today. I'm Jacob Cloughton for Shelby Varner, and we end today's show with Brad White, Brian Lubbers, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Phillip Lancaster from the Beef Cattle Institute.
So when we talk about calves at this time of year, and I'll just frame it by saying if we've got a spring herd, a spring calving herd, those calves are 1 to 2 months of age. And I want to ask each of you, what are some of the things that that I should be thinking about? If I'm a cow-calf producer and I call you and say, what should I be thinking about working on? Brian, I'm going to start with you.
Now's kind of a good time to do some of those basic, what we call processing procedures, right? And so I think I'll start with, if we have bull calves, this is a great time to castrate them. They're at an age where they're young enough. We probably mitigate some of the pain responses that we do compared to if we were to wait till they were older. And so I'll say, around that 2 month of age mark, and certainly you can do it a little bit earlier if you'd like, but that's a good time to start thinking about castration, and with that, probably also some protection against clostridial diseases, depending on which castration method you use.
Yep, absolutely. Bob, what about either external or internal parasite control?
Yeah, it's a good time to start thinking about some parasite control. And let's first of all think about internal parasites, so worms. The problem with worms, and like many things, different species of worms have different predilections and different challenges. So you can't put them all into one category, but I'm going to try to do that somewhat anyway. And that is that young cattle really don't have much resilience. And I don't know if it's immunity or resilience or whatever. And so they actually respond relatively well to a dewormer. And so once they get out on grass, young calves really benefit from a deworming because they don't have their own protection. Adult cattle, it depends a lot on the geography. It's really hard to give blanket statements. Even in a state like Kansas, the risk level in the eastern part of the state with a higher rainfall, higher stocking density is quite different than as you go farther and farther west. And the thing about an adult animal is they actually build some resilience or immunity against parasites over time, so that an adult, for most, and this is where there's some species differences of the worms themselves, but for most of the parasites, the adults are fairly resilient unless the exposure is really high. And where is the exposure really high? Well, you could even start saying southeast Kansas and farther southeast because of basically a better environment for the parasites.
Absolutely. Good answers there, Bob. Dustin, anything you'd think about from the economic side?
Yeah, so when your calves are young, you've probably got some kind of marketing plan. You know, where are you going to market those calves? Are you involved in some kind of program that requires certain kind of practices like vaccinations, et cetera? Also, in your marketing plan, you probably got something to do with your risk protection. There's a couple of insurance products for calves. You've got the livestock risk protection, both for feeder and fed calves. And there's a new product this year out called weaned calf risk protection. I believe it's only offered in 4 states at the moment. But I suspect that it's just a trial this year, and they'll continue to expand. And so those would be just a few things when I'm thinking about what's in my marketing plan for young calves.
Yeah, and this is the time to start thinking about those, because sometimes some of those risk protections help us if we don't get enough rain, right? If our pastures aren't doing as well. Phillip, speaking of on the nutrition side, is it too early to put creep feed out or not, or will they start using some of that? What are your thoughts?
It's not too early from a calf physiology standpoint, but from an economic standpoint, you probably don't need to put creep feed out, because the calves, at this point, still you're right around peak milk production for the cow. They're probably not going to consume a whole lot of a creep, and so you're not going to get much benefit out of it. This 1 to 2 months of age is when that calf's rumen really starts to take off, and they start to increase their consumption of grass and get start to become a ruminant animal, and so they'll start to consume more, especially as you turn out to green grass. They're going to start to consume more grass, and that milk's going to start to decline here in about a month, and so they're going to start to switch between primarily milk to primarily grass.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a great transition plan. So thank you guys for your input on young calves.
That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.